Hey everyone, did you know the concept of using cranes to move objects first originated more than 3,500 years ago? And ever since then, we've been using them to build the structures we need. So, join me for today's video. We're going to look at 15 of the most amazing types of cranes. Number 15. Big Carl. Alright, before we jump into the different types of cranes and what they do, let's kick off this video with a real showstopper in the crane world. Introducing Big Carl, the largest crane in the world. It's officially called SGC 250. Big Carl has unparalleled lifting capacity. Just to put its lifting capacity into perspective, Big Carl can lift 20 planes or 1,400 elephants. It's got a capacity of 5,000 tons. The crane was designed and built by Sarens, which is a Belgium-based heavy lifting specialist company. The crane debuted its power for its first project at the Hinkley Point C nuclear plant in the United Kingdom. It towers over the ground at a staggering 820 feet at its tallest point. Also features 96 wheels and runs on a 3.7-mile track. The crane's powered by 12 engines and it's supported by 52 counterweight containers. So although it looks like it could topple over at any given moment, rest assured, Big Carl is safe and secure. The nickname Big Carl comes from Carl Sarens, who's the father of the company that built this behemoth crane. Number 14. Floating Cranes. Floating cranes are also sometimes called a crane vessel or a crane ship, since the crane is mounted onto a sea vessel. They're used for a number of projects at sea, and they've been used for a long time, but their design has changed significantly over time. The earliest types of floating cranes were simply old ships that had been converted. These large cranes were mounted onto the deck of a ship, but with time and technological advances, of course, floating cranes changed and veered away from the converted monohulls. The main purpose of a floating crane is offshore construction, since they can get the job done out at sea. As such, floating cranes have become essential in the drilling industry. They can maneuver very large and heavy sub-assemblies, so they can assemble some pretty massive projects from a lot smaller assemblies. And they can do it in all sorts of weather, too. But along with their integral role in building platforms for drilling, they have another pretty cool use. Floating cranes are often used to retrieve sunken ships. By working alongside a retrieval vessel, floating cranes are able to raise the sunken ship to the surface. It's pretty cool. Number 13. Level Luffing Cranes. Level luffing cranes are similar in a lot of ways to tower cranes, which you'll see later on, but they do have one very major difference. Level luffing cranes don't have trolleys that run along the jib. Their hook blocks are fixed at the end of the jib, so it's the jib itself that moves up and down. Basically, the hook stays at the same level when the crane is doing its luffing. This difference means that the load is able to stay level while being lifted. The main advantage is that the crane can be set to operate at a fixed level relative to ground, so it can handle load materials with precision. Level luffing cranes are essential for projects where the load needs to be moved near ground level, and it needs to be moved carefully and precisely. For this reason, level luffing cranes are commonly used for shipbuilding and for loading and unloading freight. These types of cranes are equipped with a lot of modern safety features like CCTV cameras and anti-collision and zoning systems. The operator cabs boast easy-to-read display screens, flexible seating, and climate control. They also feature stepless motor operation of the trolley and hoist so they can creep more slowly. Level luffing cranes are a very safe way to move large materials, and watching them work is pretty fascinating. Number 12. Crawler Cranes. Unlike some other types of cranes that boast free-range mobility, crawler cranes are locked onto a track. Basically, a crawler crane is a track-based vehicle that has a crane apparatus attached to it. Because the tracks offer weight dispersal properties, these cranes can work on soft ground, so the crane is more stable because of the steel tracks. It's got more contact with the ground, and it can therefore lift a lot more weight than just a plain old rubber tire model. Now, these crawler cranes don't have wheels but are instead built on an undercarriage that's fitted with tracks. The engine sits on top of the tracks, and then there's the control area and the cab. Above the cab is the boom. On the boom are cables that run up through it to attach to whatever object is being lifted. Now, given their design, crawler cranes don't have a lot of turning capacity, but on sites with soft ground, they won't sink, so their ability to stay above ground outweighs their limited turning capacity. They're most commonly used for long-term projects, but they're pretty bulky and take a bit of prep work to set up. Plus, they have to be transported from site to site, so using them for short-term projects wouldn't make much sense. In fact, it's the crawler's size that's sometimes its detriment. It can lift loads as heavy as 3,500 tons, but the crawler itself is so massive and heavy that it often has to be disassembled and moved by truck or train to its next job site. So while it can lift some pretty hefty loads, it's pretty costly and time-consuming to transport. Number 11. Telescopic cranes. The main feature of a telescopic crane is that the boom has a number of tubes that are fitted inside each other, so the boom can increase and decrease in length. It does this thanks to hydraulic mechanisms that extend or retract the tubes. That's pretty genius, right? Well, the crane industry concurs, which is why most construction cranes today are in some form a telescopic crane. With the exception of lattice boom cranes, they have an iron-constructed frame that's bolted together. Telescopic cranes are technically a fixed crane, although a lot of telescopic cranes are mounted onto a truck so they can be transported from one construction site to a next. Given their versatility and their ability to extend and retract, they're often used in short-term construction jobs, but they have another application. Telescopic cranes are sometimes used in rescue operations. They can be employed in emergency situations, such as when a natural disaster strikes. Basically, they can adjust to whatever height is needed according to the location they're at and the purpose they're serving. Telescopic cranes, they're highly versatile. Number 10. Truck-mounted crane. Also known as boom trucks or picker trucks, truck-mounted cranes are a widely used type of crane. These cranes are mounted on a truck with rubber tires and have outriggers that extend vertically or horizontally. These outriggers both stabilize and level the crane while it's hoisting. They are very versatile because of their mobility and reach, but truck-mounted cranes can't lift a whole lot. Most truck-mounted cranes can't exceed a 50-ton capacity, and these types of cranes are most often used for construction, infrastructure, HVAC, roofing, and even industrial moving. There are several types of truck-mounted cranes. A stiff boom crane, also known as a straight boom crane, uses a hydraulic winch to lift materials. The materials are lowered or raised using the boom. Boom on a stiff boom crane can be rotated and extended. And then there's a folding boom crane, on the other hand also known as a knuckle boom crane or a loader crane or a picker crane. They're designed to work in tight or small spaces. They have two booms, a main and an outer boom. These booms are attached by knuckles, which allow the whole boom structure to move in and out, similar to the knuckles in our fingers. As such, they can maneuver in small areas where other cranes can't. Number 9. Aerial cranes. Aerial cranes are very different from all their land-bound crane counterparts. Why? Because aerial cranes do their work from the sky. Also known as sky cranes, they're used to lift materials that are pretty awkward. For example, if something needs to be lifted at the top of a mountain or somewhere far away from a road or on top of a building, then aerial cranes can get the job done. They're also sometimes used in rescue operations. They're attached to helicopters and they carry their load by way of a long cable or even a sling. They can reach pretty much any place, which makes them ideal for remote locations. They're really only used, though, when other types of cranes aren't an option. Aerial cranes first started hoisting from the sky in the 1950s, but they weren't popular at first. It took about a decade for this unique type of crane to catch on. By the 1960s, they were being used by several industries, including the construction industry. And while they're used for several different things, they're most commonly and consistently used in the logging industry. They can lift large trees that can't be accessed by road vehicles. Sometimes the terrain is just too tough for a road, but other times the environment is too sensitive to construct a road, so aerial cranes can remove the trees without the need for a road. So, aerial cranes have become essential to the logging industry. Number 8. Overhead cranes. You'll most likely find overhead cranes in industrial areas because that's what they're designed for. Although some larger types of overhead cranes called Goliath cranes can be found in shipyards and outdoor manufacturing plants. It's also known as a suspended crane or a bridge crane, although that name is misleading because they don't work on bridges. Overhead cranes have a hoist that's set on a trolley and it can move in one direction along one or two beams. They're mostly used to move very heavy or really bulky loads through the overhead space in a building or facility. They're used for when it's more effective to move materials up and overhead than when it is to move them on the ground along the floor. There are two types of overhead cranes, gantry and jib cranes. Gantry cranes are supported by both A-frame steel legs and are usually built on a track. These types of overhead cranes are the most common seen at ports and shipping docks where they lift cargo from ships. Jib cranes, on the other hand, have the arm mounted on either a wall or floor-mounted pillar and are permanently installed. They're generally used for repetitive tasks. Number 7. Carry deck cranes. Carry deck cranes might not have the wow factor that some of the other cranes have, but they're extremely useful. These carry deck cranes are a fairly new type of crane. They're the predecessor of the older pick and carry model, a model that was first introduced in the 1980s. Carry deck cranes are small in comparison to a lot of other cranes, but their small size makes them extremely portable, much more so than most types of cranes. They've got 4 wheels and they can rotate a full 360 degrees. Now, these cranes are really easy to set up and they can navigate their way through both open and restricted spaces. As such, these cranes are an important part of most job sites. They're low profile and so compact they can move through tight spaces. They usually have hydraulic controls that help with their precision, and some models have pickup capacities of over 9 tons, so they can hoist some pretty heavy stuff. And the fact that they can do that in confined spaces makes them invaluable. Needless to say, since their introduction, carry deck cranes have become very popular and a welcome addition to a lot of different job sites. Number 6. Bulk handling cranes. Bulk handling cranes are capable of carrying a large volume of heavy materials, but they're specifically designed to lift bulk loads like coal and mineral ore, for example. To do this, bulk handling cranes have a specialized look. This is not a hook at the end, but rather a grabbing mechanism and a bucket to grab hold and lift materials. This is called an integral grab and can handle a whole range of slung loads. Different grabs have different names. For example, when the grab is a 2-piece hinge bucket, it's called either a shell grab or a shell bucket. The grab mechanism can be 4-rope, double rope, single rope, double chain, hydraulic, and single rope self-dumping, just to name a few. Choosing the right grab depends on what's being lifted and the combined weight of the grab itself and the contents being lifted. Since contents can vary in density, purity, like wet or dry, flow characteristics, and a whole slew of other things, most bulk handling cranes are built or dedicated for one specific product. Some bulk handling cranes, though, handle a variety of materials and therefore have selections of grabs. Bulk handling cranes have been around for a while, and the first bulk handling crane was made in 1927, and it's used to unload coal at a station in London. Number 5. All-terrain and rough terrain cranes. Alright, as their name suggests, all-terrain cranes are built for all types of terrain. Construction sites sometimes present challenges, and they can be located in places where the weather often changes or where the terrain is less than ideal. So enter the all-terrain cranes. These types of cranes are specially built to handle this type of terrain effortlessly. They're known for having greater mobility than most types of cranes, as well as a faster speed. All-terrain cranes combine the strength of the traditional hydraulic truck crane with the mobility of the rough terrain crane. And as such, these versatile cranes have a wealth of advantages. They feature an all-wheel steering suspension system that can maneuver through both gravel and sand. They boast a smooth performance on highways and asphalt roads with a top speed of about 55 miles an hour. They can move from site to site independently. They have an integrated boom and a compact design, and the mobile undercarriage allows for better adjustability. Needless to say, all-terrain cranes are pretty cool and useful for construction projects that pose a bit more of a challenge than others. They're actually quite similar to rough terrain cranes. Things aren't always built on smooth surfaces. Some building projects are situated on rough terrain, so sure enough, there's a crane for that. Much in the same way that we have vehicles that can travel places that other vehicles can't, these cranes are designed for places that are a little harder to access or a little tougher to work on. These rough terrain cranes are designed for off-road operations. They've got outriggers that extend vertically and horizontally to level and stabilize the crane while it's hoisting. These cranes got a single engine. The single engine used to power both the crane and the undercarriage. The crane itself is mounted on an undercarriage that has 4 rubber tires. Now, these cranes are ideal for construction sites that have a lot of uneven terrain as well as rocky or dirt terrain. They boast a lot of mobility and can travel easily around construction sites, so they're highly effective for lighter hoists on highways like infrastructure projects. They can't lift materials that are as heavy as all-terrain cranes can, though, but they score points for mobility and maneuverability. Number 4. The PTC 200DS. Alright, some types of cranes are mass-produced, but sometimes there's a need for a crane so big it's not the stuff for mass production. That's the case with the PTC 200DS. This crane stands at almost 675 feet tall and is owned by Memoet, a company located in the Netherlands. It's one of the biggest and most powerful cranes on the planet, and watching it work is pretty awe-inspiring to say the least. It features an attachment that can lift 3,500 tons. This crane has such a heavy maximum capacity that it has to be anchored down by 35 shipping containers that are all full of sand. The sand-filled shipping containers act as a counterweight so the crane is stabilized and won't tip when it's lifting. The maximum lift height is 459 feet with a radius of 446 feet. The crane was recently upgraded and now allows the crane to lift a 2,000-ton structure in one piece. Previously, it had to do it in multiple sections. But because this crane is so strong, it's been used in many places around the world. It's been seen in Canada, the United States, and South America, just to name a few. It's most commonly used for large refinery and petrochemical projects. It did partake in one special project, though, that earned it some bragging rights. It was used to help construct the Dubai Observation Wheel. The wheel is the world's tallest Ferris wheel, taking riders on a maximum height of nearly 700 feet in the air. Number 3. Tower cranes. Tower cranes are probably the type of crane that are most recognizable. Towering high in the sky, these powerful cranes are most commonly used in the construction of tall buildings. They boast some pretty incredible lifting capabilities, and they're a sight to behold. They're controlled by an operating cab and are equipped with a jib that extends horizontally from the mast. The mast itself rests on a concrete base. They vary in size, but some of the larger ones can reach over 3,000 feet high. Because they work so high up in the air and because they're so tall, it's really important for these massive cranes to be connected to the building. Otherwise, they would risk swaying or, even worse, completely tipping over. This ensures that everyone at the construction site is safe. The engine on a tower crane is called a slewing unit, and it's responsible for controlling the rotation of the crane, which sits atop the mast. The luffing jib has the ability to move down and up. The fixed jib has an operating dolly that moves horizontally. Tower cranes are most often static since they help construct buildings over a long period of time. The most common type of tower crane is a hammerhead crane. Hammerhead cranes look a lot like an upside-down L, and their jib remains at a set level. The jib is able to rotate, but it can't be lowered or raised. Hammerhead cranes have a feature called racking. Racking allows the trolley to move forward and backward horizontally along a crane arm. Tower cranes can be seen all over the world at all sorts of different construction sites, and it's not uncommon for these cranes to turn heads as people drive by. They're most often used in urban areas, and they're essential to the construction of large buildings. Plus, they're pretty amazing to look at. Number 2. Container cranes. If you've ever wondered how those shipping containers get on and off those container ships, you're about to find out. It's called a container crane. Container cranes are large devices that are used to lift shipping containers. They either load or unload the containers and are a type of gantry crane, which is a form of crane with a hoist that travels along an overhead beam. Unlike other types of cranes which move along large amounts of space, a container crane is usually pretty stationary. It's often fixed in one permanent location. Another major difference is that container cranes don't have a hook. Instead, a container crane has something called a spreader, which is a specialized handling tool. The spreader is lowered on top of a container and then locks onto it with its corner casting, which are its 4 locking points. It does this by using a twist lock mechanism. These container cranes are extremely powerful and require a lot of training to run. Because of their size and power, it's important that they're run safely. There are several different types of container cranes depending on where and how they're being used. Full gantry units are used in canals or other bodies of water by straddling the water. They hoist up the containers when the ship is positioned below them. Full gantry units are not as common as half gantry units. Half gantry units extend over the edge of water in a deep harbor or port. Then there are high-profile units which feature a hinged arm that's used to lift containers up and over the ship and onto the shore. And lastly, there are low-profile units that swing out. These units can move containers without lifting them to extreme heights, like on other container ships, and are most commonly used in areas where the shipyard is in the flight path of planes, like close to an airport. Container cranes are also sometimes called ship-to-shore cranes. The very largest of these cranes are called Superpost Panamax. Some of these Superpost Panamax cranes can lift 2 20-foot-long containers at the same time with a lifting capacity of 65 tons. But others can lift even more. There are Superpost Panamax cranes that can lift 6 20-foot containers at once. These massive cranes weigh upwards of 2,000 tons and are the most modern container cranes around. Number 1. The Asian Hercules III. The Asian Hercules III is one of the largest floating cranes in the world. And one look at this massive beast and it's not hard to see why it made the top spot on this list. This Asian Hercules III has a lifting capacity of 5,000 tons, which is far more than most cranes out there. Furthermore, it can lift these heavy loads to a maximum height of 393 feet, which is pretty high considering how heavy the load is. And as a floating crane, the Hercules III does its heavy lifting offshore. It was constructed in 2015 and its official classification is ABS A1 AMS Heavy Lift Vessel. The crane was designed by Gonibo and it required a 5,000-ton modular block system with the spreader beam, luffing blocks, and sheaves. All in all, it took 2 years to design and build this thing. Along with its massive size and lifting capability, the crane also boasts interchangeable parts that can be customized, so when needed, it can accommodate different lifting configurations. With a name directly suited to its size and strength, the Asian Hercules III is the perfect example of what a floating crane can do. I'll see you next time.
Watch our Machines playlist for more top 15 videos about awesome machines. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best machine videos.